There was a long pause. He said, we're really pretty desperate, so I guess we're just going to have to give you a chance. And that was my first job.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. It's a little crazy to think that in the 1970s, only 11% of veterinary students were women. Today, it's around 84%. My guest today didn't just witness that transformation, she fought for it every step of her career, starting from graduating from vet school at the University of Pennsylvania in 1978. As a newly minted large animal vet, Dr. Linda stepped into the barnyards of Utah, where many dairymen insisted women didn't belong. Every calf she delivered, every cow she saved, built her confidence. Every setback, every gendered insult tested it. At home, the demands of farm life collided with marriage, forcing Dr. Rhodes to confront a question women everywhere ask: can she truly have it all? As a person who loved to learn and was raised to be curious, her career was full of twists and turns, doing many different things, from pharma, developing medications, to starting the first animal health award for women called Feather in Her Cap that occurs every year at VMX. Her life is definitely an adventure that I'm excited to share with you today. On top of it, she is a masterful writer and is publishing her first book called Breaking the Barnyard Barrier, which will come out on February 17th, 2026. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you are inspired. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Linda Rhodes. When did you know that you were even interested in veterinary medicine?
Oh gosh, it's kind of an unusual beginning because I wasn't interested in, not only wasn't I interested in veterinary medicine, but I wasn't even interested in biology when I was an undergrad. I was interested in the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, quantum mechanics, all kinds of mathematics, all kinds of crazy stuff. So when I graduated college, I went out to live on a farm on a commune in California back in the days of the hippies when we all were going back to the land. And I just gravitated towards the animals. I really enjoyed milking. I learned how to milk goats, and I was milked about 20 goats by hand. And we had sheep and chickens, and I just really enjoyed the animal care. And whenever something went wrong, the vet would come and I would wander around behind him, and it was always a guy. And I just realized that I really wanted a lifestyle where I could use my scientific brain, but also be connected with animals and be able to be outside and not have to sit behind a desk. And so it really didn't start until about 1970, 71, many years ago, more than 50 years ago.
Well, backing just a little bit, your father was in the sciences as well, but then also had an artistic side because also did photography. I think your mother also had some artistic to her as well. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about growing up and what'd your parents do? How did they kind of set you up for finding a career path going forward?
I was so fortunate in my parents. They were really unusual people. They both came from very tiny little towns in Colorado, very poor farming communities, but each of them had some kind of spark. And I really don't know where they got it from, but when they got together, it just turned into this kind of wave of wanting to know more, to do more, to be more, to travel, to learn things, to read. And they both came east, and my dad studied photography at Rochester Institute of Technology. And my mom was, kind of a typical housewife, but at home, it was all about learning. It was all about asking questions. It was all about curiosity, which is, the kind of the basis of science. And lots of conversations around our dining room table about all kinds of things to do with the natural world and why things were the way they were. And my dad was always getting our slide rule and doing calculations. But he also was an excellent photographer. And he got more interested in the chemistry of photography and actually became kind of a world expert in color reproduction, the whole method by which you take a picture and you put it on paper and the kind of inks that you need. And he ended up being hired by Xerox to invent the color copier, and his name is on all the patents for the very first copier that copied things in color. So I grew up in this kind of mix of kind of artistic sensibility, but also questioning and They were very nonconformist. They really asked lots of questions about why do we do it like this? Why are we living in this way? Are there other ways we could live? And always questioning, are we thinking about what we're doing? And it was just a terrific way of growing up. And it made me a lifetime learner and a lifetime person of curiosity. So I still read widely. I read science and nature. I was just reading the most recent science magazine this morning about quantum mechanics and learning about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and crazy stuff that has nothing to do with veterinary medicine, but it's just fun to have a curious mind.
Yes, and questioning how things have always been or questioning everything in a curious way, not necessarily like in a cynical way, right?
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Is really going to set you up for success. Is kind of like a preamble here, which is super exciting. So, fast forwarding a little bit, you talked about working the land and really connecting with animals. And so you go to vet school and you commented that it was always a guy who was the vet. Did you even stop to wonder, is this something that I will be able to do? Or did you just set your mind to it and go get your biology courses and apply? How was that?
So I didn't know anything about veterinary medicine when I started. I never worked in a vet clinic. We took our cats to the vet. It was always a guy, but it never occurred to me that women weren't welcome until I started to take my pre-vet biology courses that I had to take. And I was at SUNY Binghamton. And, I just looked up what the requirements were for Cornell and Penn, which are the only two schools I thought I could apply to. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a pre-vet advisor. But when I was taking my first, I think the first course I took was microbiology. My teacher said, "Oh, you want to be a veterinarian? You should go talk to Dr. So and so. He runs the pre-vet program." And I thought, "Oh, I didn't know there was a pre-vet." So I went and met with him. And when I walked in the office, he just said, "Oh, just forget it. Women don't get into vet school." It's extremely rare that women get into vet school. And, unless your father was a vet or you grew up on a farm or, you were in 4-H for years or you volunteered at a vet clinic for years, you don't have a chance. Cornell maybe takes 3 women per year, 2 or 3. Penn maybe takes 2 or 3. You're just not going to ever go to vet school. I walked out of that office saying, I am going to vet school.
I like it.
I was just like, I wanted to prove that guy wrong. And he was so obnoxious and so dismissive. And I thought, how hard could it really be? I can do this. But then I realized, okay, I have to get a straight A's on all my bio courses. Organic chemistry I had to take and 4 bio courses. And I knew I had to get straight A's. So I just said, I'm going to get straight A's. And I just worked my heart out. And I was very fortunate to get into Penn.
So, kind of having that experience with this advisor, you knew you were successful, you got in. What were you expecting when you walked in, like the first day to vet school?
Well, I was fortunate in that Penn had about 3 years prior been pressured by the faculty to admit more women. And so my starting class was 40% women, which was really quite unusual. But I didn't know what to expect. I knew it was going to be hard. But I didn't realize how hard. And it was tough. The first semester was really hard because most of my classmates had a lot more biology than I did. They'd already taken anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and all those kinds of courses. And I'd never taken any of those courses. So I was late nights and all weekends and nose to the grindstone pretty much all the time. And it was really pretty intimidating, but I did okay.
Just got to survive it. So,
Yeah.
well, did you, I mean, again, coming from your experience in California, working with goats and things like that, did you, through the whole time of vet school and of course getting out, think that you would be focused on farm animal mix? Like what were your thoughts and did that change at all during vet school?
From the very beginning, I was just like all about being on the farm. That's what I wanted to do. You have to do dog and cat and chicken, but I always wanted to do Mainly dairy. I was interested in goats, but I was also interested in dairy. And the way that Penn is set up is that there's the main campus is in downtown Philadelphia, but all their large animal stuff is out at New Bolton Center, which is about an hour west of Philly. And on Saturdays, they had rounds, and any student could come out for Saturday morning rounds, and you'd be in the barn. And so I tried to go every Saturday so I could be around farm animals. And it was hard because I didn't have a car, so I'd have to find somebody who was gonna be driving, and we had to leave really early in the morning because rounds started, I think, at 7:30 in the morning, so we have to leave at, like, 6:30 or 6 to get out there. But I tried to go almost every weekend so I could have some connection with the barn, and every time there was a choice of some elective you could take, I would always choose something related to cows or goats. And, yeah, I knew from the very beginning I was very kinda laser focused. I couldn't believe my friends who were doing a combined VMD PhD program. I'd be like, "Why would you go to vet school if you were just gonna do research? Just go do your PhD." I mean, but, little did I know back then that I would eventually get a PhD as well. But then I was laser focused. I just wanted to be a rural large animal vet, and that's what I was working towards.
And as we were discussing, I got to read the first part of your book that you're going to publish here in February. And you're describing an early call to a farm. So I'm curious, it was, spoiler alert, it's successful. But what do you feel like prepared you the most to start jumping into being full veterinarian before we get to the other parts of the job? But like when it comes to taking care of the animals, like why you into vet school, what do you think prepared you the most for that?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I tried very hard to get as much experience as possible, but you never have enough experience to feel totally confident the first time you do a procedure. And particularly a surgical procedure where you're in the barn, you're not in a hospital, you don't have technicians, you don't have people who can help you. You just have to take it on yourself. And it's very scary. It's very intimidating. And you just have to take a deep breath and say, I'm it. If I don't solve this problem, there's not anybody. I can't look over my shoulder and say, okay, doc, you take over here. No. Like you do when you're in school. They let you do stuff, but there's always one or two people standing behind you who can step in and save your rear end if you need safety. But, I think I was a little bit older. I had been out of school for a while, so I was about 3 or 4 years older than most of my classmates. I had all that experience on the farm. I just was brave enough to take it on, but it is intimidating, and there were moments when I was just thinking, "What am I doing here?" And I talk in the book about Elaine Hamill, who was one of my mentors at Penn, a woman who did large animal work. And I remember calling her the first year I was in practice and saying, Elaine, when do you stop feeling terrified? They call you in the middle of the night and they tell you about some catastrophe and you have to go out and deal with it. And you think, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? When do you stop being scared? And I was thinking, once you get 10 years of experience under your belt, you're never rattled by anything. She said, Linda, you never stop being scared. You just stop showing it. And that was just such a piece of wisdom. And it just gave me permission to realize everybody feels that. It's not just me that's inadequate. This is just how it is. You can't feel competent about everything. There are always going to be situations where you feel like you can't handle it. You just do the best you can. You're in a situation where if you don't do something, the animal dies, you just do the best you can. And if the animal dies anyway, well, you did the best you could with what you had. So I just kept that mantra in my head, and that helped me a lot.
Well, so you did get a position. What took you all the way to Utah? Because is that where you started in Utah? That's quite a trip.
Yeah, I wanted to practice in upstate New York. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I was married at the time, and my husband was in a band. He was a hippie musician, and he was in a band with his brothers, and he loved playing music, and he was based in Ithaca. And Ithaca's right in the center of the dairy world. There's lots and lots of dairy cows in that area. So I was planning on getting a job there. And I started interviewing my senior year, and I had more than a dozen interviews, and I couldn't find a job. They were not hiring women, period. They told
Specifically women, they told you that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would never hire a woman for this job. Or, "Honey, look at you. You just blow away in a breeze. How are you gonna push the cows around?" Or, "My wife wouldn't like it if I was riding around in a truck with a woman." I mean, nobody would hire a woman, and they made it crystal clear. And there's a couple of stories in the book about my job interviews, which were really pretty harrowing. So I just my parents had moved to California, and I decided maybe in California it would be easier. It's just a more liberal place. I'll go out to California. California was worse. I could not even get an interview in California. They just flat out said we would never hire a woman. So I basically was like at a dead end, and I took a small animal job because my student loans came due, and I lived with my parents, and I was practicing in a way that I didn't wanna practice, and my husband was 3,000 miles away, and I was like, "What is going on with my life?" I mean, this is just like a disaster. And I had a friend who was doing an internship at Utah State. They didn't have a vet school then. They had an animal dairy and vet science department, and she was in their diagnostic lab, and she called me and said that there was a clinical internship that was just basically helping them take care of their dairy and their beef cattle and their sheep and goat institute. And they'd hired a new grad, a big Mormon guy from Colorado. And she called me and she said that that job is available now. And I said, "What do you mean? That's like September. It's a job for a new grad. They hired somebody in May." And she said, "Yeah, but he got kicked by a cow and broke both his legs, and he's out. And so now they have an open position, and it's for a new grad, and all the new grads already have jobs, so they're desperate. They might consider hiring you." So I drove all the way out to Utah and had an interview, and they were kind of like, No, no." I mean, it was a weird interview, but they were very skeptical of me. And so I drove all the way back to California. And a couple of weeks later, I called them and said, "What's up?" And they said, "Oh, we can't find anybody. And we've looked, and all the new grads already have jobs. And it's really hard because now I'm having to go out in the middle of the night and do the calvings. And my wife is upset with me because that's the intern's job." And on and on and on and on. And I just was listening, and listening. There was a long pause. He said, "We're really pretty desperate. So I guess we're just going to have to give you a chance." And that was my first job.
Thanks. Wow.
That's how I ended up in Utah. And you know what? I was happy because I didn't care if they were desperate. I wanted the job. I wanted to work with cows, and that was a big part of the job. So I went to Utah.
Yeah. Well, my goodness, so many thoughts. One, it's completely understandable to question yourself because everybody else seems to be questioning you. That doesn't really help your confidence at all. But then also, you're right. It's like, how can I learn? How can I even start to show people what I can do? I'm not even being given a chance. So that's really frustrating. So yeah,
It was a very hard time. I came close to giving up when I was doing the small animal work and taking care of little yappy poodles in Pasadena, California. And I was just like, this is not what I signed up for. I mean, it was okay. At least I was practicing. I was making some money, but it was not what I wanted. And I came really close to giving up.
yeah.
So I'm glad I didn't.
Well, I'm glad you didn't either. So, I mean, the heavens opened up. You had the opportunity. So, how did it start? Like, share those first experiences
Oh,
of
gosh.
being in Utah.
Well,
Again, this is very different from other places you've lived. Like, Utah's a different culture.
yeah, all my colleagues were Mormons. I got given a lot of books of Mormon. I actually liked it. I mean, it was very different from me. They certainly had very different beliefs than I had. But one of the wonderful things about a Mormon community is they take care of each other. And because I was taking care of their cows, I kind of became an honorary member of their community. So when I needed something, they were there for me. And it was really a wonderful experience. And even though we differed wildly in our beliefs and our kind of even our politics, we didn't really talk about that. We talked about the cows. And they were very happy. After a couple of years and they got used to the fact that I could do what I could do, I was kind of in demand because I was the only woman vet, large animal vet in the whole state. And I was pretty good at my job, and they used to brag to each other, "Hey, I got that lady cow vet taking care of my cows." It was like a badge of honor, because I had to turn clients away because I didn't have enough time for everybody. And so the dairies, I did take care of some of the best dairies in Utah and Idaho in that area. And thank God those dairymen accepted me, because if they hadn't, I would have not ever been able to practice there, because there was real dairy royalty in that area. I mean, people who they sent embryos to Japan, and they had some of the highest milking cows in the world there, and really, really high quality dairies. And those guys, they didn't care that I was a girl. I could have been purple and from Mars. If I showed up and I took good care of their cows, they were happy. And that was really wonderful.
Yeah. So you just had to show that you cared and you could do the job. And
That's right.
yeah, it may have been a really lucky opportunity that that was where it ended it all up. Now, you talked about your husband was doing music. Did he join you in Utah, or how did that work?
Yeah, he very reluctantly left his life to come out to Utah. I think always hoping that since it was an internship, it would just be over quickly and we'd go back to upstate New York. But I knew I wasn't going to get a job in upstate New York. And I got right out of the internship, I got offered a job in a practice in Utah and Idaho. So he came out, and he really didn't like it. He really missed his family. Came from a very close knit Italian family where everybody played music, and he just didn't like it. And by the end of 2 or 3 years in Utah, we ended up splitting up, and he went back to Ithaca, and he's still there playing music. I actually saw him a couple weeks ago, listened to him play a swing dance at a Quaker meeting house. And, we just had to go our separate ways because we had very different lives.
Yeah. Oh, and sorry if I'm getting too personal, but I do know that being a parent is a big part of something that you're passionate about too. So, did you have a child during those times, or when did the baby come?
No, I could barely like cook dinner, much less think about having a child when I was working in Utah.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I was not focused on having kids at all. I actually back then was saying I didn't want to have kids. I was so wedded to my career. It was until many years later. I went to California and I did some practice out there. I came back east, and when I was about, well, how old was I? 32 or 33. I was back east trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I had gotten accepted to a PhD program at Cornell, and I, by chance, met a guy who ended up being my second husband.
Right.
And he was Israeli. He is Israeli. And we got together, and I still wasn't really thinking about having a child. I didn't have my son until I was 42. So several more years went by, and I was in the PhD program, and I finished the PhD program. I was starting my first job, and I just decided it was time. And so we had a son who's now 34 years old.
Yeah. Well, let's come back because I know he's a big part of your story in the book and all the things. So I think it is important to go back because you talked about you weren't even thinking about that when you are practicing. It's a very intense job. Again, the story that it starts the book out is you came home from a long day, barely got settled and got a phone call and had to go right back out. So it's a very intensive career that you were passionate about and being very successful at that and building a community. But especially with large animal too, it's a physically very demanding job. You mentioned going and doing a PhD. What was the transition between getting to be the badge of honor that people had you as their vet to deciding it's time for a change?
Yeah, after about 5 years of practice, I used to say it's like 95% routine, 5% panic. I was good at what I did. I went out every day. I did it. I showed up. I did the emergencies, and the challenge wasn't there anymore. The next mountain to climb wasn't there. And I saw these old vets who'd been practicing for 20 or 30 years. They never traveled. They didn't have time to read stuff. They didn't have time to have other interests. And it just seemed like too much of a routine to me. I was thinking about maybe I'll go to Africa and work with the UN and try and deal with parasites in cattle in Africa, or just something different. I just wanted something different. I did a lot of exploring of other job possibilities, and I just stumbled into the PhD. It was just by chance. I was living in Ithaca and I was doing some bovine relief work where I'd go in and take over a practice if somebody wanted to take a vacation or something. And Cornell had a professor who taught bovine palpation, reproduction, and he had a heart attack. And it was right in the middle of the semester. And they were desperate to have somebody teach that lab. And they called me, and, it was only like 10 hours a week or something, but it got me on campus. And then I was like, oh, there's this whole world. There's this whole academic world with books and libraries and research and people, curious people. And it just like looked really attractive to me. And I said, I'm willing to walk away from practice and just do something completely different. And if I could have been a practicing vet one day a week and done my PhD the rest of the time, I would have done that because I really loved practice. But I ended up working on a research project that involved sheep. And part of my fellowship was I had to take care of the sheep. So I was out at the sheep barn a lot. So I still had some, I was trimming feed and I was giving vaccinations and I was dealing with wounds. And so I still kept my hand in a little bit in the barn. But it was just great to go to research conferences and travel and have access to the library and a lot of interesting, thoughtful people who were doing interesting things. And my life was ready to swing in that direction.
Yeah. My mind went back to your parents, the curious nature, the reading and the thirst to learn and ask questions.
Yeah.
And academic setting can definitely be a good place to do that. So it's neat. And again, being able to take care of animals, you still had some connection back to the
Yeah.
to Mother Earth.
Yeah, I did. Actually before I did the fellowship at Cornell. I did a sabbatical in Israel because I wasn't married yet and I wanted to meet my future husband's family and see his country. And so I got a 6-month job teaching embryo transfer to the Israeli veterinarians,
Wow.
which was also challenging because there were no women. All the large animal vets were men. But they gave me a little Peugeot and they gave me some lab equipment. And I went from kibbutz to kibbutz teaching all the vets how to do embryo transfer in Israel. So that was pretty fun. And I have pictures of me doing rectal exams on camels because I was really interested in camel reproduction too. So I have some really wild pictures of me with my arm up the back end of a camel.
Well, I will say, as I told you before, I listened to another podcast that you have been on, and you talked about palpation and that you worked very hard at it, and it's a hard skill. And that made me feel so much better because I will say, in vet school, I felt so silly. They would say, you should be feeling this, this, and this. And I'm like, nope.
We used to call that the hope and grope method. I'm like, you're like, I hope I can feel the ovary. Maybe I can grope around here enough. Maybe I'll find it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's what an exciting transition into a different path for you. So how did you start to get involved in more the industry side coming out of academia?
Well, my dream was to teach in a vet school. But again, there were just no jobs. And there were also very few women being hired. And basically, they told me if you want to do a couple more postdocs to do more research experience, or if you want to get board certified, you have to go back and do a residency. And I just didn't want to do more training. I mean, I had already been in practice and I was getting older and I was ready for a real job. And I just stumbled across an opening at a company, Merck, in New Jersey, to do some animal model work in reproduction and endocrinology, which was what my PhD was in. And I went down to interview and I wasn't thrilled about living in New Jersey, but the job was a really good fit for my skill set and the pay was phenomenal. And I had been poor for many years, paying off my student loans and, not making much money in practice and then being a PhD student and not making hardly any money at all and having really hefty student loan payments. I hadn't been able to save anything. I didn't own a home. I was really happy to make a good salary. So frankly, that was a big part of my decision. And again, it was something new. It was research. It was learning about drug development. It was living in a different place and entering a brand new industry. And, I was kind of ready for it.
Yeah. What was that like? I hear a theme of, they weren't hiring women and tends to be a challenge. Well, even today, there's still not maybe the most balanced representation and industry, especially in leadership. So what were you experiencing just kind of growing your career in industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the through lines of my career has been advocacy for women. And I've become bolder and bolder in calling out organizations and institutes that are discriminating and just frankly are discriminating. And I hope that I've changed some things. I think that I have had an impact in that regard in industry, particularly. I like to say to these folks, you're selling animal health drugs and vaccines to veterinarians. And you might not have noticed, but a lot of the veterinarians are women. Your customers have changed. It's not all guys anymore. And so maybe you should think about changing leadership roles in industry to be more in tune with your customers. And that seems to resonate with some of these companies. But yes, when I started again, I faced discrimination. At Merck, I like to say that it wasn't a glass ceiling, it was a dense layer of white men, that you just bumped up against. It's like they all look the same, they all dress the same, they all went to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. There are no women. Everybody's a runner at Merck. Everybody was a runner. It was just there was no diversity at all. Yeah, so I struggled with that, and I did switch jobs a couple of times, and finally I just said I just don't want to deal with it anymore. And I had an idea for a business, and I said I'm going to just quit it and start my own business. Luckily by then I'd saved up enough money. My son was about 10 years old. My husband had bought a small animal practice. He's a veterinarian, and he was practicing in a small animal practice, so we had some financial security. And I just decided I didn't want to put up with it anymore. And I figured I'd start my own business, and it would be a woman-friendly business, and it was good. And the first person I hired, she came to work for me for like a 30% cut in her salary because I told her I would have no problem with her getting pregnant and having a baby. And if her baby had an ear infection, she could stay home. And she was happy to come and work for me. And we're still friends. She did end up having 3 kids. And I made a company that was women friendly, and it was transformative. A lot of those women then went to work for other companies and transformed those companies. And so, yeah, it was very, very fulfilling. But yeah, I was in industry for about 10 years working for somebody else when I started my own business.
Well, going back to while you were still in industry and kind of talking about how you were inspired to make a women-friendly business going forward, is that it sounded like it was a really demanding time and you had a baby. And I think I remember again listening to that podcast episode where you got to a point where you were feeling overwhelmed and really needed somebody to kind of give you advice of being mom and just career woman. And that was the person that you said was maybe one of the bigger mentors that you've actually had in your entire career journey. So, what was that moment where you were really starting to struggle? Because I think just this is really common. And so, being able to share this will be really helpful for people. But what was that like, kind of those feelings coming and reaching out to see if anybody had a word of wisdom or a little bit of hope to give you?
Yeah, it was a tough thing, and it still is tough for women. I was fortunate in that, I had the finances to afford good childcare, but we only got 8 weeks of maternity leave, and then I had 3 weeks of vacation. So after 11 weeks, I had to go back to work. And my mother-in-law came over from Israel for a month, but when my son was 4 months old, I put him in daycare. And I was nursing, and I didn't know anything about pumping milk. There was no infrastructure. There was no place to pump milk at work. It was a really difficult exhausting time, and I was being asked to travel even internationally when I had this nursing baby, and yeah, I was fortunate in that a woman who'd been at Merck for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years more than I had, who had 2 young kids, and yeah, I just leaned on her. She just gave me a lot of encouragement, and she just said, one of the things she told me is, "Don't do the PTA."
Oh,
It's
here.
like, you don't have to be class mom, you don't have to show up at the PTA, you don't have to feel guilty that you don't sew a Halloween costume. Don't let those pressures get to you. Just focus on what's really important. Focus on being with your baby, being with your kids, having quality time, and, you don't have to do it all. Hire somebody to clean your house, try to get your support network in place, but just work 9 to 5. Just don't feel guilty. Leave when it's time to go pick up your son at daycare. You just go, and your career will be fine. You won't, you might not get that big promotion, but you don't need it at this stage in your career. You can just do your 40 hours a week and have time for your family. And it was really helpful to hear that. And she was right that it did impact my career. You can't have it all. The men that progressed up the ladder, all of them had stay-at-home wives, all of them. So they had a full-time person who was taking care of their kids and doing the cooking and the dental appointments and getting the car fixed and all those chores so that they could be 12 hours at work every day. I didn't have that, and most women don't. So we looked to other women who had navigated this, and luckily, after a couple of years, Merck opened an on-site daycare. So it made it much easier because then I could just take my son with me to work and drop him off at work. And then if in the middle of the day, if I needed to be there, I could be there. It was very, very close by to my research lab, and it was subsidized. So it wasn't so expensive. Yeah. I mean, without good childcare, it's just impossible.
Yeah, as someone who has had a baby not too long ago, I'm still in the nursing stage, so she's almost 15 months, and I spent a lot of time traveling since she'd been born, and it's still really hard.
Yeah.
The stories I could share, and that's with a very female dominated space. That's with all as far as we've gone. Like there's still opportunity. So again, I think it's so wonderful to hear the supporting encouragement from people,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially the ones who have done it. It's like, yeah, it's gonna be hard, but you can do it. Focus here. This is what's really meaningful, and just having that encouragement, I think
Yeah.
it
And
really.
and what I will say is that I was way too involved in my work. I didn't have hobbies. I wasn't exercising. I'm an overachiever, so I wanted to do everything possible at work I could do to be successful. And I was just obsessed about, who got which promotions and who was working on which projects and all the details of my research. And I was just work, 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 work all the time. When I had Adam, my son, that just instantly went away. It was like a magic button was pressed, which was that, wonderful love you have for your child. And work just did not seem so important anymore. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't achieve at work. I did everything I needed to do at work, but I left it at the door when I left. And I came home and I was in love with my child. And it was so much healthier. It was so much healthier. And I just treasured those bath times and reading times and nap times and play times. And I could just let go of all the drama of work, which turned out to be not so important anyway, frankly, and really have a better life. And it was transformative. So, when young women ask me about, I'm trying to decide whether I should have kids or not have kids, I just tell them it will change your life in a positive way. No matter what the situation is, you will be madly in love with your baby, and it will change you in profound ways, and for me, in extremely positive ways. So I had Adam when I was quite old. I was 42, and I joked with people that it's a good thing I didn't do this when I was in my mid-20s because I would have had a dozen kids. You know, but by the time I was 42, I couldn't get pregnant again, and I was just had to let it go. But yeah, I love being a mom.
Thinking about words of wisdom, you talk quite a bit about parenting and kind of managing It's good to still care about your job, but you leave the silly stuff, where, worrying about who's getting promotions or things like that. Like you said, you're an advocate for women, and so there's opportunities for us to focus in more on certain things that are more important to get where we want to go, to be at the table if we want to be at the table. So I heard you talk about the importance of connections and building relationships and making sure that you're not two heads down. What are your thoughts around when it comes to prioritizing or making sure that you're implementing something to feel like you are doing the right things, the helpful things to get where you want to go in your career?
Yeah.
What's your advice?
Well, maybe this is a little bit gender stereotyping, but I think in general, women kind of intrinsically believe that if they do a really, really good job, they will be recognized and promoted. And so they focus, sometimes exclusively, on doing a really, really good job. Doing all the details, showing up on time, getting projects completed on schedule, being strategic in how they tackle the work, whatever the work is. But they forget about relationships. And in my experience, the most important way to progress in your career is to develop relationships. And maybe spending maybe not as much time on relationships as on work, but a significant amount of time connecting with people that you work with and building your network. Because people promote their friends and people refer their friends to good jobs. If somebody trusts you and feels connected to you, you have a much better chance at getting assigned on that sweet project you really want to get assigned to. If that person only knows you by your work product, but they don't have a relationship with you, they're not going to think about you for that position. I've watched a lot of men progress up the ladder, particularly at Merck, solely on relationships. I could look at what we did, what we delivered in terms of drug development and progress on big projects in the company, and I would have done 10x what they would have done. And I didn't get those promotions. I mean, part of it was I was a woman, but a lot of it was I just did not spend time building relationships. And it's really served me well in my career when I finally figured that out. And I'll tell you, I this seems like an odd thing to mention, but I'm rereading Tolstoy's War and Peace, which is a novel that I love. I'm big on 19th century novels. Tolstoy has a section in there that actually says that. One of his characters, who's in the military, remarks to another person that the reason he's progressed so much isn't based on his work, his family connections, his money. It's solely based on developing relationships with people who are in a position to promote him. There's a little paragraph that I just read a couple days ago, and I went,
It was prayer all along.
Tolstoy knew this back in 1867 when War and Peace was written. He was 42 years old. It's a truism. And women just, for many times just have never been taught that, have never really, we think it all should be fair. If you do a really good job and you do good work, you're gonna get what you deserve. And it's just not true. So that's my words of wisdom is just develop relationships with people and they can be, I mean, this is why this whole thing about men playing golf together is such a trope. It's true. I mean, spend some time on building friendships and connections with people who are in a position to promote you.
Mhm. Well, and I think you're giving forward in this too by starting a movement where you are recognizing women for both the work that they're doing, but it also creates a network opportunity. So you've created something pretty amazing, the Feather in Her Cap award. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah.
I got to learn about it a couple of years ago, and I think it's a really fantastic initiative.
Yeah, I'm so proud of Feather in a Cap. I got frustrated that the only award in the animal health industry, which is called the Iron Paw Award, was given by the Kansas City animal health corridor was only given to men for 12 years in a row. And I got together some of my women friends in industry and said, what do you think if we just give an award to a woman? And they were like, great idea. I was a little worried that people would say, oh, well, it's kind of discriminatory. But I thought, you know what? The Iron Paw Award is only going to men. Let's just do an award that recognizes senior women that are high achieving women in the animal health industry. And my women friends were all for it. And so we started it up, and it has just been a terrific success. The first year we had all the major companies supported us. We had a big event. We have it every year at VMX in Orlando, cocktail hour and a dinner and an award ceremony. And it's just gotten bigger and bigger every year. And a lot of women show up to it. And a lot of it's the place to be seen at VMX if you're in the animal health industry. The CEOs of all the major companies come, the senior executives come, startup companies come. It's just been terrific, and we've recognized a number of women. I think this year is our 9th year. I, on purpose, stepped back from the board because I wanted it to continue without me leading it, so I haven't been involved in planning it for the last 3 years, and it's doing great, and it's still growing, and they're raising tons of money, and it's really one of the things I also really like about it is now there's 3 awards. There's an award for a woman entrepreneur, there's kind of a lifetime achievement award, and then there's an award for a younger woman who's been in industry for 5 years or so that is a kind of an up and coming award. And we celebrate all the nominees. So it's not just the people who win, we celebrate everybody. And that gives them tremendous visibility in the industry. And I really do think it has changed the industry. I think it has made people aware of the talent that's available. And certainly there are more women in leadership positions now than there were 10 years ago.
Well, I think just by how eager people were to support it from an industry perspective also shows a clear change and honestly, really a brief period of time. So that's really encouraging. And I think there's, of course, more opportunities going forward, but that can also be inspiring for us to do something about it. I think that's it too, right? Like not being afraid to, especially if we are already in those positions, to support others behind us, to be seen, heard,
Absolutely.
give them opportunities as well. Well, I know we're running out of time, and I've cited your book a couple of times and absolutely love it already. And I'm like first chapter in. You're a wonderful writer. And one of the things that I really loved when I asked you is what inspired you to write this book? And it kind of goes back to being a mom and again, sharing
Yeah.
your wisdom going forward.
Well, I'll show people my book. This is the book. Those are pictures of me when I was 30 years old in practice. The cow on the cover, her name is Pinky. And my son took a look at this top picture. He said, Mom, you look like Top Gun, striding along in your coveralls with your dark glasses.
You do. Think about that next time you're walking. You are like top.
So it's just, it's to my son, Adam. I started this many, many years ago because sadly my mother died when she was 58 and I was in my 30s. And, I was so obsessed with being a vet and my career that, I had really not ever sat down and asked her about her life and about her history and about how she met my dad and about how she gave up college to be a mom. And there's just so many things that I wished I had known about her. And I realized that I had my son when I was 42. So by the time he's in his 30s, which he is now, I'll be 77 this coming May. He's not interested in asking me questions at this point. He would never know about this world. I mean, this is a completely different world. When I had him, I was in the pharmaceutical industry. And I realized I better start writing down some of these stories so that when he turns 50 and he suddenly decides he's interested in his mother and I'm long gone, he'll at least have the book. So that's what got me started.
Yeah. And I hear that there might be another one in the future too. So stay tuned, follow her. She has an amazing website. And I also want to thank you, even though you are in air quotes retired, you are still extremely active in the veterinary community, supporting innovation. You're being able to see some of the really cool leading things in our profession. And I want to thank you for continuing to support that. But as we close, the question that I love to end with is, what is something you're very grateful for right now?
Well, actually, I would have to say my health. The older you get, the more precarious things can be with your health, and I've just been super fortunate to be healthy enough to continue to contribute. And, I think second to that, it's really all the colleagues that have been so supportive over the years and, all as I talk about making connections and friendship, it's not just to get ahead. It's also because you develop this ecosystem of people who care about you and who you care about, and it's just been so fulfilling, and this industry in particular seems to be very much a community. To have so many friends in the industry who they're curious about what I'm up to, I'm curious about what they're up to, and, being healthy enough to enjoy that network, it's a real blessing. So, yeah, it's, uh it's my health and it's my wonderful friends in the industry.